April 19, 1938, Berlin. 5 men in crisp SS uniforms boarded a train bound for the Himalayas. They weren't soldiers, they were scientists. Their mission wasn't conquest, it was proof. Heinrich Himmler, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, had given them a task that seemed impossible: find evidence that the German people descended from the lost civilization of Atlantis. This wasn't academic curiosity, the survival of Nazi ideology depended on it. How does the most technologically advanced nation in Europe become obsessed with ancient myth? The answer lies in the wreckage of World War I. Germany lost everything in 1918: territory, pride, purpose. The Treaty of Versailles carved up the nation and demanded impossible reparations. Millions starved, inflation destroyed savings overnight. The German people needed an explanation for their humiliation that didn't involve accepting defeat. Into this despair stepped the occultists. The Thule Society formed in Munich in 1918, named after the mythical northern homeland described in ancient texts. Its members weren't just mystics, they were lawyers, professors, and industrialists. Educated men searching for meaning in the ruins of their country. They found it in a dangerous idea called Ariosophy. Ariosophy taught that the Aryan race descended from Atlantis. The theory claimed that this advanced civilization existed thousands of years ago on a continent in the Atlantic Ocean. Its people mastered technology, architecture, and spiritual power beyond anything seen since. They were tall, blonde, blue-eyed supermen who ruled lesser races with ease. Then came catastrophe: earthquakes, volcanoes, floods. Atlantis sank beneath the waves in a single day and night. But the Ariosophy believers added a crucial detail: some Atlanteans survived. These refugees fled across the globe, to Egypt, where they built the pyramids, to Tibet, where they established hidden kingdoms, to South America, where they taught the primitive locals architecture and astronomy. Everywhere they went, they became gods to the indigenous peoples, the culture bringers, the proof that Aryan genius had shaped every great civilization in history. The evidence, they claimed, was everywhere. The swastika symbol appeared in India, Tibet, China, even among Native Americans. Ancient flood myths existed in nearly every culture. Megalithic structures too advanced for their supposed builders dotted the planet. All of it, the Thule Society insisted, pointed to a single source: Atlantean refugees spreading their knowledge to an inferior world. This wasn't fringe theory for long. The Thule Society became the scaffolding for something far more dangerous. Its members included Dietrich Eckart, who became Adolf Hitler's mentor, Rudolf Hess, who would become Deputy Führer. Dozens of early Nazi Party organizers got their start in Thule meetings. By the time Hitler seized power in 1933, Atlantis wasn't mythology, it was doctrine. The theory solved every problem the Nazi worldview faced. It explained German superiority without relying on Christianity. It justified territorial expansion as reclaiming ancient Aryan lands. It provided a historical precedent for racial hierarchy. Most importantly, it gave Germans a mythic destiny: restore the greatness their Atlantean ancestors once possessed. Heinrich Himmler believed every word of it. As head of the SS, Himmler commanded 250,000 men. He controlled the Gestapo. He would eventually orchestrate the Holocaust. But his deepest obsession wasn't political power. It was proving that the Atlantis myth was historical fact. In 1935, he created an entire research organization to do exactly that. He called it the Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Society. The mission was clear: find the evidence, prove the Aryans descended from Atlantis, show the world that German domination wasn't conquest, but restoration. Himmler poured millions of Reichsmarks into the effort. He recruited archaeologists, anthropologists, historians. Some believed the theory, others simply wanted funding and careers. By 1937, Himmler had exhausted the obvious locations in Europe. But he needed something undeniable, something that would prove the Atlantean refugees had established a civilization far from European eyes. He needed Tibet, the roof of the world, isolated by the highest mountains on Earth, home to mysterious monasteries and ancient wisdom, a place where Atlantean survivors could have fled and preserved their racial purity for millennia. Himmler needed a scientist brave enough to go there. He found his man in Ernst Schaefer, a 26-year-old zoologist with movie star looks and a gift for self-promotion. Schaefer thought he could use Nazi funding without becoming a Nazi tool. He was wrong. The expedition to find Atlantis was already underway. In 1935, Heinrich Himmler did something unprecedented. He weaponized archaeology. The Ahnenerbe officially launched on July 1st with a deceptively academic name, the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society. Its mission was simple on paper: study the history, culture, and achievements of the Germanic peoples. But everyone involved knew the real purpose: prove Aryan racial superiority through science, make Nazi ideology look like historical fact. Himmler poured millions of Reichsmarks into the organization. He recruited dozens of scholars, archaeologists, and researchers. All of them understood the rules: produce evidence supporting Nazi racial theory or lose everything. The corruption happened fast. Legitimate archaeologists who refused to join found their funding cut, their positions eliminated, their careers destroyed. Those who signed up faced a different problem. They had to produce results that matched predetermined conclusions. Science became performance, evidence became propaganda. The Ahnenerbe's projects ranged from legitimate research twisted to serve ideology to outright fantasy presented as scholarship. The Externstein excavation in 1934 found ancient rock formations with medieval Christian carvings. The Ahnenerbe declared them proof of Aryan sun worship predating Christianity by thousands of years. The site became a pilgrimage destination for SS officers. Then there was Karl Maria Willigut, Himmler's personal mystic advisor. Willigut claimed he could remember his past lives stretching back thousands of years. He channeled ancient Aryan knowledge directly from racial memory. The man was demonstrably mentally unstable. He'd been institutionalized before the Nazis came to power. Himmler made him an SS general anyway, and gave him authority to design SS runes, symbols, and rituals. The world ice theory provides another example. An Austrian engineer named Hans Herbiger claimed that moons made of ice periodically crashed into Earth, destroying advanced civilizations like Atlantis. The theory contradicted every principle of physics and astronomy. The Nazis embraced it as Germanic science standing against Jewish physics. The witch research division was perhaps most disturbing. The SS studied medieval witch trials across Europe and concluded the women burned as witches were actually Aryan pagan priestesses. The Catholic Church had murdered them to suppress Aryan spiritual knowledge. Every project circled back to Atlantis. The runes were fragments of the Atlantean alphabet. The megaliths were built by Atlantean refugees. The flood myths were corrupted memories of Atlantis sinking. The Ahnenerbe was constructing an entire alternative history with the lost Aryan homeland at its center. By 1937, Himmler wanted more than twisted German evidence. He wanted proof so undeniable that the world would have to accept Aryan superiority as scientific fact. That's when Tibet entered the picture. Ahnenerbe scholars noticed something exciting. The swastika appeared throughout Tibetan Buddhism. The Himalayan plateau was high ground, elevated enough to survive catastrophic floods. The climate was harsh, isolated, perfect for preserving racial purity. The theory crystallized. When Atlantis sank, survivors fled east across Europe and Asia, finally settling in the Himalayas. There, cut off from the outside world, they'd maintained Aryan bloodlines for millennia. Tibetan Buddhism was a corrupted memory of Aryan religion. The symbols, the monasteries, the hierarchical society all proved Atlantean influence. If the Ahnenerbe could prove this, everything else would fall into place. The racial hierarchy would be historical fact. The conquest of Europe would be restoration of ancient territory. The elimination of inferior races would be biological necessity. Himmler needed scientists respected enough that their findings would carry weight, young enough to endure the physical hardship, ambitious enough to overlook contradictions. He found his leader in Ernst Schaefer, a brilliant zoologist who'd already been to Tibet twice, a man hungry for fame, a man who believed he could use Nazi funding without becoming a Nazi tool. Schaefer assembled his team, 4 other scientists, each with specialized skills, One of them would change everything. Bruno Bega, a 26-year-old racial anthropologist trained to measure skulls and classify humans by supposed racial characteristics. Bega was the true believer, the man who would search for Atlantean descendants among the Tibetan people, the man whose work would lead eventually to Auschwitz. By April 1938, everything was ready. The expedition to find the lost people of Atlantis was about to begin. If this journey into one of history's darkest obsessions is opening your eyes to how mythology became murder, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what happened in Tibet and what came after reveals truths about the Nazi regime that most documentaries never touch. April 19, 1938. 5 SS officers departed Berlin on the most ambitious pseudoscientific expedition in history. Their leader, Ernst Schäfer, believed he was different from the other Nazis. He was a real scientist. He'd separate legitimate research from Himmler's occult fantasies. He'd collect specimens, study wildlife, map unexplored terrain. The Atlantis nonsense was just what he had to say to get funding. He was catastrophically wrong. Schäfer's team included a geophysicist, an entomologist, a botanist, and a cameraman. But the most important member was Bruno Bega, the racial anthropologist. While Schäfer chased birds and mammals, Bega would be measuring skulls, searching for evidence that Tibetans descended from Atlantean refugees. The expedition had 2 agendas that couldn't coexist. Schäfer wanted legitimate science. Himmler wanted proof of Nazi mythology. The journey nearly ended before it began. To reach Tibet, they had to travel through British-controlled India. Before Schäfer even arrived, British newspapers exploded with headlines. Gestapo agent in India. Nazi spies infiltrate the empire. The British authorities refused them entry. Himmler personally intervened, writing directly to Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. The gambit worked. The British backed down but imposed strict conditions. Schäfer could enter northern India and explore Sikkim, but he was expressly forbidden from entering Tibet without official permission. Schäfer set up camp near the Tibetan border in May 1938. Months passed, the expedition was trapped. Bruno Bega used the time to begin his racial research. He measured skulls with calipers. He recorded eye color against standardized charts. He photographed faces from multiple angles, cataloging every detail. The measurements were meticulous. The science was garbage. Bega was searching for Nordic ancestry in short, dark-skinned, black-haired people. He found none. Every measurement contradicted the Atlantis theory. Then in December, after 8 months of waiting, a letter arrived from Lhasa. The Tibetan ruling council granted permission for all 5 Germans to visit the holy city for 2 weeks. The first Germans ever officially invited to Tibet. On January 19, 1939, the team saw the massive Potala Palace towering over Lhasa. But a British representative in the city was already working to undermine them. The grand welcome Schäfer expected never materialized. Schäfer deployed his secret weapon: Nazi flags, SS daggers, swastika emblems. He explained to his hosts that Germany revered the ancient symbol just as Tibet did. The Tibetans were delighted. They had no idea that in Europe the swastika had become a symbol of mass murder. The deception worked. The regent gave them unprecedented access to film monasteries, ceremonies, and sacred sites forbidden to the British. Schäfer had scored a massive propaganda victory. But the scientific mission was failing. The letter from Lhasa included one devastating restriction: no hunting. Schäfer had traveled halfway around the world only to be banned from collecting specimens. He hunted anyway, quietly, when no one was watching. Bega's work faced worse obstacles. During the New Year festival, the team pushed too close with their cameras. Angry monks stoned them. After that, Bega's skull measurements were considered too provocative. The team forbade him from continuing. Bega watched in frustration as subjects passed by. Monks in crimson robes, aristocrats in silk. He described seeing many tall, beautiful people. But he couldn't measure them. The racial evidence slipped through his fingers. The expedition had become a paradox, politically a triumph. Schäfer had humiliated the British and befriended Tibetan leadership. The regent wrote a letter to Hitler praising the German visitors. Scientifically hollow. Schaefer had few specimens. Beger had incomplete data that contradicted Nazi theory. The swastikas they photographed proved nothing except that an ancient symbol appeared in multiple cultures independently. Then the messages from Germany became urgent. Europe was moving toward war. Return immediately. By August 1939, they were racing back through India. They landed in Munich on August 4th. Heinrich Himmler himself waited at the airport to greet them as heroes. 27 days later, Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War began. The expedition had found no evidence of Atlantis. Beger's measurements proved nothing. The swastikas meant nothing. But Himmler didn't care about the actual findings. The expedition itself was the victory. Germans had conquered Tibet where the British had failed. The real reckoning would come later, when Bruno Beger's training in measuring skulls led him to the gates of Auschwitz. They returned as heroes in August 1939. Himmler greeted them personally. Newspapers celebrated their triumph, but the question remained, had they actually found proof of Atlantis? The answer was unambiguous. No. Bruno Beger's meticulously collected measurements told a clear story. The Tibetan people showed no evidence of Nordic ancestry whatsoever. Their skull shapes, facial features, and physical characteristics were distinctly East Asian. Every data point contradicted the Atlantis-Aryan theory. The refugees from the drowned continent had left no trace because they'd never been there. Himmler didn't care. The propaganda value far exceeded any scientific findings. German scientists had reached forbidden Lhasa while the British fumbled. The SS had triumphed where the British Empire had failed. That alone proved German superiority in Himmler's mind. The actual evidence was irrelevant. Schaefer became a national celebrity. His films and photographs filled propaganda reels. His scientific work went largely unexamined. Most of his specimens and data were eventually lost or destroyed in the chaos of war. But the Ahnenerbe didn't stop searching. Even as war consumed Europe, Himmler diverted resources to occult expeditions. In 1938, a team searched Iceland for traces of Thule. They found nothing. In 1942, during active combat in the Soviet Union, another expedition searched the Caucasus Mountains. They diverted military resources for mythology while soldiers died. They found nothing. The scientists who'd served the myth paid different prices. Ernst Schaefer survived the war, but his career died with the Nazi regime. He was tried for collaboration, but cleared of major crimes. Still, no legitimate institution would employ him. He fled to Venezuela and created a wildlife park. He died in 1992, still insisting he'd been a pure scientist. He'd been lying to himself for 50 years. Bruno Beger's fate was far darker. In February 1943, Himmler sent Beger to Auschwitz. His task was specific and horrifying. The Ahnenerbe wanted to create a collection of Jewish skeletons for a museum of inferior races. Beger was to select the specimens while they were still alive. He measured 109 Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz. He made detailed facial molds, took photographs, recorded every physical characteristic. Then they were sent to the gas chambers, murdered specifically so their skeletons could be preserved for Nazi pseudoscience. The victims were finally given proper burial in the 1950s after Allied liberation. Beger was tried in 1971. Convicted as an accessory to murder, he received a 3-year suspended sentence. He never expressed remorse. He lived to 98, dying in 2009. A man who'd searched for Atlantis and ended up selecting human beings for extermination. Heinrich Himmler never abandoned his belief in the Atlantis myth. Even as Germany collapsed, he clung to his racial theories. He committed suicide in May 1945, biting a cyanide capsule while in British custody. He escaped trial for orchestrating the murder of 6 million Jews. The Ahnenerbe was dissolved with Nazi Germany's defeat. Its leading members were tried at Nuremberg. Some were executed. Others received prison sentences. Many escaped justice entirely, but the most disturbing truth was yet to be confronted. The Atlantis myth wasn't separate from the Holocaust. It was connected at the deepest ideological level. The myth of a lost perfect civilization led directly to obsession with racial purity. The fantasy of Atlantean refugees created a hierarchy with Aryans at the top and Jews at the bottom. The pseudo-history justified territorial conquest as restoration rather than aggression. The pseudoscience led from Bega measuring Tibetan skulls to Bega selecting prisoners for murder. When mythology drives policy, horror follows. When belief overrides evidence, genocide becomes thinkable. The expedition to Tibet found no Atlanteans, but it revealed something far more important. It showed how easily science could be corrupted, how quickly scholars could compromise, how seamlessly mythology could transform into murder. Bega went to the Himalayas searching for ancient wisdom. He came back with training he would use in the gas chambers. That was the real discovery. Not lost continents or ancient refugees, but how low human beings could sink when they stopped questioning their beliefs, when they let myth override truth, when they allowed ideology to corrupt everything it touched. The Tibet expedition was supposed to prove German superiority. Instead, it proved something else entirely. That the most dangerous myths aren't the ones we tell about the past. They're the ones we use to justify the present. So what were the Nazis really searching for in Tibet, Iceland, and ancient texts? And what does it tell us about the danger of weaponized mythology? The evidence is clear. Atlantis, as the Nazis imagined it, never existed. The swastika mystery they thought proved Atlantean influence has a simple explanation. The symbol appears independently across dozens of cultures because it's a basic geometric shape with aesthetic appeal. It appears in ancient India, Tibet, China, Native America, and Greece not because Atlantean refugees spread it, but because humans in different places created similar designs. The swastika predates any theoretical Aryan civilization by thousands of years. The Nazis appropriated it. They didn't inherit it. The flood myths that seem to point toward a single catastrophic event have an equally mundane explanation. Over 200 cultures have flood stories because humans settled near water and experienced floods. The end of the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, raised sea levels dramatically. Coastal settlements were swallowed. Real catastrophes became cultural memories. No single source civilization required, no Atlantean diaspora needed. Just natural phenomena remembered in story. The culture-bringer figures like Oannes in Mesopotamia, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, and Viracocha in the Andes appear similar because human civilizations develop similar needs. Agriculture, writing, astronomy emerge independently when conditions allow. Ancient peoples attributed these advances to gods or wise strangers because they'd forgotten their own developmental process. There's no evidence of actual foreign intervention. Certainly not from drowned Atlantis. Modern scholarship reveals what the Nazis refused to see. Plato's Atlantis first appeared in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, around 360 BCE. He presented it as allegory for hubris and divine punishment. He used it to illustrate political philosophy. No other ancient source mentions it. Most scholars believe Plato based his story on real events. The Minoan civilization on Crete was destroyed around 1600 BCE when the volcano on Thera erupted. Santorini was blown apart. Mediterranean cultures were devastated. Plato mixed history, fiction, and moral lessons into cautionary tales. The term Aryan was originally linguistic, not racial. It described Indo-European language families. The Nazis racialized it fraudulently. Modern genetics proves conclusively that no pure Aryan race ever existed. All human populations are mixed. Migration and interbreeding is the story of humanity. The racial categories the Nazis died for were fiction. As for Tibet, the plateau was settled gradually over millennia by East Asian populations. They adapted to high altitude over thousands of years. Buddhism arrived from India in the 7th century CE. The swastika came with Buddhism, an ancient Hindu and Buddhist symbol. Genetic studies show no European ancestry in Tibetan DNA. The Atlantean refugees Himmler sought never set foot in the Himalayas. So why did the Nazis need the myth so desperately? Because Germany was humiliated after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles stripped territory, imposed crippling reparations, and crushed national pride. The German people needed a narrative that explained their present weakness without accepting permanent inferiority. Atlantis provided that narrative, a golden age to return to. A story that framed present suffering as temporary deviation from rightful dominance. A promise that Germany would restore the glory its Atlantean ancestors once possessed. The myth served political purposes too. It justified territorial expansion as historical correction rather than naked aggression. It made conquest seem like restoration. It united the population around mythic destiny. War became a noble quest instead of criminal violence. But most importantly, it served ideological functions. It created a hierarchy with Aryans at the top. It dehumanized Jews, Slavs, and others as inferior. It made genocide seem like biological necessity rather than mass murder. It cloaked evil in pseudoscientific language. It transformed hatred into policy. The warning for today is clear. Mythology becomes dangerous through predictable stages. It starts with an attractive myth. Lost greatness, golden age. Then comes pseudo-scholarship, cherry-picked evidence, ignored contradictions. Then institutional support, universities, think tanks, media amplifying the message. Then suppression of dissent, punishment for those who question. Then connection to present grievances. Blame enemies for the loss. Finally, a violent solution. Eliminate corruption, restore purity. Modern conspiracy theories follow the same pattern. Lost technologies, hidden histories, suppressed truths, usually tied to racial or nationalist agendas. The warning signs remain the same. Evidence-free certainty, persecution complex, claims of forbidden knowledge, enemies hiding the truth. There's a line between harmless and harmful. Enjoying Atlantis as fiction, harmless. Speculating about ancient mysteries, mostly harmless. Using mythology to claim superiority, dangerous. Building policy on debunked theories, catastrophic. Combining myth with state power, genocidal. The Nazis didn't find Atlantis in Tibet because Atlantis never existed as they imagined it. What they found instead was what they brought with them. A desperate need to believe in a mythic past that would justify a horrific future. The expeditions, the measurements, the symbols, all of it was theater. Elaborate performance of pseudoscience designed to dress up hatred in academic robes. The real lesson isn't about lost civilizations or ancient mysteries. It's about what happens when mythology becomes policy, when belief overrides evidence, when a nation's insecurity transforms into supremacist fantasy. The Tibet expedition returned with nothing but propaganda and data that contradicted their theories. But by then it didn't matter what they found. The myth had already done its work, and millions would die because of it. The expedition was supposed to prove German superiority. Instead, it proved something else entirely. That the most dangerous myths aren't the ones we tell about the past. They're the ones we use to justify the present. And when we stop questioning our beliefs, when we let ideology corrupt truth, the distance from fantasy to death camp becomes terrifyingly short. Bruno Bieger went to Tibet searching for Atlantis. He came back and selected prisoners for gas chambers. That's not two separate stories. That's one story about what happens when mythology matters more than humanity. If this journey through one of history's darkest chapters has opened your eyes to how dangerous weaponized mythology becomes, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications, because understanding how nations fall into these traps is the only way to prevent it from happening again. The myths they believed killed millions. The truth might save us.